Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this, our second in the Hyde Park Bethlehem weekly devotion series that we're trying out. And today we will be looking at Acts 3 and 4 together. So, in Acts 3 and 4, it really focuses on two of the apostles, Peter and John, as they go out on town. They go out around the temple and they heal someone there. This causes a disturbance. A bunch of people come to see what's happened, eventually including the temple guards and the Sadducees that are there. They get thrown in prison for a day, and then the temple rulers want them to not be out preaching who Jesus is and doing this healing again. But they say no and are released because there's really no grounds for them to be held. If you want to take a break and read all of Acts 3 and 4, so you can get a little bit more details about the story. But what I want to reflect on in today's devotion is what really happens there, the very end of chapter 3 and into chapter 4. Because there's a conflict that takes place. There's a power struggle, and it's not just a power struggle that's due to the conflicting religion, but it's one group that has all of the power, asserting that power over the other group, over Peter and John in this case, and using it to see what happens. Now, it's interesting here, when we think about the life of Jesus, particularly in the last week of his life and the conflict he had, while he did have conflict with the temple authorities and the rulers, it was ultimately the Roman Empire, through Pontius Pilate, who executed him on a cross before he was raised 3 days later. But here we have a similar group. We have the same temple leaders, as a matter of fact. They're named, and they're the same ones who were there the months prior when Jesus was executed and then raised again. But once again, they're using what authority they have. Therefore, or this time with the temple guard. And this temple guard goes and throws them in prison. It's late in the day, so it's not until the next day that they're brought before the temple rulers. And they get into a theological argument in which the priests are astounded that Peter and John are able to speak so articulately about what they're doing with the healing. Of course, we're reminded that Jesus went and healed many people in many different ways, questioning and seeing them. But oftentimes with Jesus, the thing was, don't go and tell anyone. Wait a little bit before you tell. Here we, of course, have an immediate uproar, and thousands of people were told, come to see it and come to have faith in Jesus through this healing. 5,000 or so. Now, you can tell when you're reading through chapter 4 that the temple just really wants this to go away. You could tell those rulers thought that this was over when Jesus was put on the cross and died. But no, now months later we have the same cast of characters who, when Jesus was taken by the authorities, ran away, now boldly proclaiming God, including directly to the temple priests, and even resisting being told to be quiet and stop what they're doing. And once they are released, they join together with all of the people who are around them. And it got me thinking, because there's a long history of groups having power, having authority, having the ability to arrest, to imprison, to tell people through court systems and everything, as part of controlling crowds and using that to control nations, about how we see that happen today, about how that might challenge or change how we live out the gospel. I've been out multiple times at protests, have literally at times had lines of police officers lined up against me as I was with groups marching for justice related matters. But what we're seeing here is that the message will continue on and will continue to be carried. Now, the message, of course, is not easy or free to carry out, is not one that there's no consequence for. I was reminded, and I saw this week, perhaps you have too, about the story of the woman who was on a plane that was delayed. It was either in Florida or in Nashville, but on this Alaska Airlines flight, she got up and started preaching to them in the delay. And this eventually led to her being taken off of the airplane because of her actions by the flight crew and everyone there. Now, this, I think, is a very different example than the story we're looking at today. There we have a captive audience. The people on the plane can't get off. They're trapped. I don't know if you've ever had a delay on a flight, but it certainly exacerbates all the negative feelings that you can possibly have. You want to go and just get the flight done with, and you have to spend more time crammed on these seats, waiting for whatever to happen is going to happen. And so this woman in this situation thought that it was the appropriate time to stand up and give a full sermon about the gospel. Now, don't get me wrong, you can give a full sermon about the gospel at many different times, even if it's going to be ineffective. As I'm going to sporting events, as I'm going to the Reds game around, there'll often be people out there with signs and proclaiming that Jesus saves. And I want to agree with them in message, but maybe not in method. Thinking that maybe they're not going to be the most effective to reach out, but they're certainly living out their beliefs in what evangelism is. But really, we see that kind of shock and awe here, because Peter and John don't have a deep relationship with the person that they heal. Now, we hear about that relationship in the story as the person who was healed has a group of friends who make sure day in and day out that he's assisted near the temple gates so that he can beg and get food from that location. And that's that deep relationship that sometimes that we have. Peter and John don't have that relationship, but they just come on and, much like the shock evangelist, as I'll refer to them, call this person, heal him, and send him away, attracting miraculous attention and bringing everyone together. But there's also that promise of relationship, of community, of the growing Christian community in Jerusalem, of the growing community that we all need. When we look at it, and we look at statistics on how people change their minds and what they do when they're joining church, we see that people spend time with people they know. And the first contact, the number one reason people actually come to church, actually engage in something, is that a close friend invites them, not a pastor, not someone on the street. It's those relationships that we've built out, that we've established with people, that we use to give that encouraging nudge, to give that little push along the way, to get them to continue on in what they do. So even though we have these conflicts, even though we experience events that slow us down, maybe force us to rethink our ministry and everything that we're doing, we can also be like Peter and John here and go back and anchor everything in prayer, as they did after they were released with all the community that they had, so that those relationships could continue to be built up and the gospel could continue to be shared across all the world, as we continue to understand that Jesus is still desperately needed as much today as he was 2,000 years ago when we read the stories about his followers. And as we continue to live out that call, as we continue to live out that vision, there might be conflict, there indeed will be struggle, but we know that it's those relationships, that relationship with the church that helps sustain us, those friends and neighbors, those family members and relatives that we know along the way, all bring us together and keep us going on in faith, regardless of what happens. And so I will pray that as we continue and as we reflect, that we can tell those stories of those who brought us to the faith and those who helped sustain us along the way, so that when those struggles come, we know that God will indeed be present, because God was present in the lives of so many people who were near to us as we continue to live out the faith and call of Jesus, and seeing that community be built up each and every day. I hope you all take care and have a good week, and we'll resume next week then with chapters 5 and 6 of Acts. Bye.